A little bit more going on
Super
than
looking
last
forward to
week's.
it. Yeah, definitely.
Mm.
This week was kind of like the I guess the like high energy follow up to
Mm-hmm.
maybe a I guess slower paced episode, even though last week's episode was still really important
Mm-hmm.
and covered a lot. So
It's
Well, it's funny
amazing how
that
many.
director. Oh, sorry. Go
Mhm.
ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to comment on how that director has been really busy because Peter Hoare directed episode 3 of this season of The Last of Us, and then both the first episode and the fourth episode of the newest Doctor Who season, the one that just premiered yesterday, was directed by Peter Hoare as well. So he's all over the
wow.
place. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, we are good to go whenever you are ready to
it
kick us
worked.
off,
You
Eric. It
fixed it.
worked.
Laura, we
Well,
can't do this show without you. If last week's live stream is any indicator, please don't ever do that to us
no.
again.
So here's the thing something is screwed up. Like, don't get it twisted. Something is definitely weird about the Riverside YouTube connection. It wasn't just you, but like, it's kind of requiring somebody to be on hand to like fix it in the moment, which isn't ideal. So, TLDR, I'm going to fix this before next week so we don't have to deal with it anymore.
Did you have to like repost a stream key or something?
No, I
I know with
basically,
Twitch, that's like a whole thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, Twitch hasn't been a problem. It was YouTube specifically. But you know what? We're going to go with it. It's going. We're good. And we can get into The Last of Us.
We're gonna play music.
I mean,
All right, all
do
right, all
we?
right.
It's
We don't we don't have to play the music,
okay.
but I'm gonna on Spotify. I'm pulling up "Take on Me." No, I'm kidding. Um, Hello and welcome to What the Hype's coverage of The Last of Us. This is time to discuss season 2, episode 4, titled Day 1. We've got Chelsea on the pod. Hello, Chelsea.
Hello, Eric, and hello, everybody.
And welcome back. A strong, hearty welcome back to Laura.
Hi, y'all. It's so good to be back. I missed y'all last week, but I had so much fun watching your coverage of it, especially getting to see the show through Pam's eyes.
I know.
It was so good. I was telling Chelsea just before we got started that it really is like getting to experience the story for the first time all over again when you're talking to someone who has no idea what's coming.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. We'll have to have Pam on again. I know she said she wants to, but this week she cannot join us because she's in Seattle.
Huh.
I hope
Yeah.
she's having a better time than our
It's a little
characters.
suspicious.
I hope
Don't you
she's in a
think?
large group, actually. I kept looking for her in the corner of the camera, like, oh, where's Pam? But yes, no, it's true. Pam will be rejoining our ranks, I'm sure. If not for next week's episode, then definitely before the finale, because it's great to have that fresh perspective. But you have all three of us, our veteran Lost of Us fans here to discuss tonight's episode. Again, it was called Day One, and I think where better to begin than with a flashback. Yay! And I gotta love these. With season 1, we talked about how whenever Joel and Ellie were going to a new location, the show would take a little bit of time to kind of show here's the deal with this location. A little bit of backstory, what happened to obviously the characters that we're going to see that have survived from that time, but just in general kind of world building and setting up kind of what the various quarantine zones, like life inside them, was like. And I appreciate that the show does this. You don't always get this in the video game, or unless you're picking up all the collectibles and trying to read all the letters. You really don't get this level of color and attention. So I really liked that going into this episode.
I liked being
Definitely.
introduced to Isaac properly in this sort of prequel flashback scene, And I had forgotten, was a reminder in the behind the scenes at the end of the episode that Jeffrey Wright, who I keep wanting to call Jeffrey Beatty, which is not correct. Beatty's the name of a character he plays in the Hunger Games. Um,
He could
but
be Jeffrey Beatty. I mean, it's,
yeah. Anyways, Jeffrey Wright played Isaac in the video game. And I had no memory of that being true, but I love that just like Marlene in the previous season, Emerald Dandridge, she was able to come back from portraying Marlene in the game to play her in the show. And now I've got Jeffrey Wright doing the same thing with Isaac. And we don't get a sense of this until a little bit later, not in this prequel flashback scene, but what a scary person that Isaac is turning out to be already.
That's right.
yeah.
You know what's funny about that? I feel like Jeffrey Wright is everywhere because he also plays the Watcher in Marvel's What If.
Oh,
I
is
don't
he
know
like
if
the
y'all
guy
have
that
seen-
narrates all the what ifs kind
Yes.
of over that?
Okay.
He's the I cannot, will not interfere. And so that's what I kept thinking throughout this episode. Every time he did something horrible.
This is
or,
going to be like 5
facilitated something
degrees.
horrible.
Yeah, 5 degrees of Jeffrey Wright because
Right.
again, I most recently saw him on Westworld. The
Yeah.
HBO show, and he's Bernard on Westworld. So that is it's so funny that we all know him from something else. And now he's joined our iconic This property, or rather returned to it, given Chelsea's mention. So yeah, it was you never know quite what to expect. It seems like Fedra was the together with it government program that maybe needed to exist, or that was the only thing that was going to exist to preserve society. But what kind of society or civilization is it when you see, for instance, as explained in this opening scene, that people don't have the right to vote anymore, and their rights are slowly being stripped to the point of their rebellion.
Yeah, go ahead, Chelsea. I don't want to cut you off.
I was just going to say it's kind of a flashback to the previous season with I'm struggling to remember location and character names at the moment, but we saw this when we saw Henry and Sam, that city, those 2 episodes where Fedra had been overthrown by this rebellion party and things were seemingly going good, but then this character, goodness, what was her name?
Kathleen?
Kathleen, thank you.
And was
very
it
much.
Kansas City? Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah, I think
yes,
it was
you're right.
Kansas City.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, so goodness, Kathleen in Kansas City had this same sort of like vendetta, turning the oppressed into the oppressor mindset that we kind of see coming from the WLF and Isaac in this opening scene, and in the later scene we get with him. And the only difference being that it seems that they've been more successful this time around because it's an 11-year time jump. I think they said. So we get to see what a rebellion party looks like many, many years after their successful rebellion.
That is a good point. And since you did ask, I wanted to talk about the timeline because there was a change from the game in that in the game, I want to say pandemic. The apocalypse happened in the year the game first came out. 2013, I think is right. And for the show, they actually set it 10 years earlier to 2003. So that the 20 years later jump, when we pick up with Ellie and Joel, it's present day, aka 2023, when the first season aired. However, because seasons 1 and 2 have a 5-year gap between them, we are now in 2028 and or 2029, it seems like. Because, and in fact, with Isaac, it was described as 2018, and then now we're 10 years later from that moment in the opening scene.
Right.
So don't know when it'll come up, but what year is it seems to be a perfectly fair question if anyone's asking, because this show is going to continue to do these time jumps and kind of flashbacks, and some of them might be a little bit more local, a little bit more like a light hop, but then other times, especially if we go to any new areas or need like even more backstory of what's going on with the Prophet, that kind of stuff is probably going to be somewhere in the 20 teens, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Well, and we know there are a lot of flashbacks that we have not seen yet,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting. I was watching the opening credits. I was like, oh, okay. It's interesting that there are certain names not in the opening credits, and it made me think about, the timing of when we were getting flashbacks in the game versus how they're letting this story unfold in the show.
Laura, I share your apprehension, if we can call it that. It's We're gonna start a new segment on the show called Joel Watch. There's gonna be a beeping news bulletin when Joel comes up in an episode, because there's still about a dozen and a half, who's counting, flashbacks involving Joel that we know we should be getting through various reasons, and look no further than things that have been said already in either the making of or the official podcast. We know something continues to happen, but this was the second completely pagerless episode in a row, and frankly, it hurts. I'm starting to think that guy's gone for good, you guys.
On that note, something I didn't realize that they changed last week, and we didn't mention it. They took the Joel figure out of the end of the end
Yeah.
credits
They
opening
did.
The
sequence.
silhouette. She's all
That one
alone.
hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt attacked personally. I was like, excuse me, I did
Like,
not tune in
Just cut him out.
for this emotional abuse from The Last of Us.
Yeah. Listen, there's a hotline if you've been personally victimized by the opening credits of your favorite HBO show. Call this number. But yeah, it's, getting back to it. So the time jumps are kind of fun, and seeing more of Isaac, and I'll be honest, his specific backstory was not in the game. When we meet him, he's kind of, torturing Seraphites and that kind of thing, which is shown in this episode. But getting into kind of like his overall character, as the making of indicates, he's leader of the wolves. It really was interesting to me to see him be at a kind of disadvantage, or have to prove himself to the wolves then. Like, he, is shown in the beginning of this episode joining up with the wolves, and in order to do that, he's got to make a sacrifice and kill some fellow Fedra agents. And so that was a really interesting kind of way of setting up that character, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it really established, and I think Mazin called this out in the making of the episode, but it established Isaac as basically the only person in that military transport who had any recollection of what life was like before the apocalypse fell upon them, and before basic human decency in the society went out the window, before people's rights were taken from them, and before militarized forces were really like socialized to be outwardly hostile towards civilians.
That's a good way of putting that.
And he's just like, fuck this, and anyone who is perpetuating this is part of the problem, and I'm gonna do my one small part in trying to, I guess, cleanse this society. Which is funny when you think about his hatred of the Seraphites, and kind of how dismissive he is of them and their belief system and how they navigate the world. Again, like, the story's all about perspective. And Isaac just gives us another perspective.
Why do you guys get the feeling that, like, in 20 years, you're going to be the one rambling about French cooking while the world burns? And you're like, we used to have a Crate and Barrel or a Williams Sonoma. It used to be the store you'd go in and you say, I need not a spoon, but a thing that holds the spoon on the stove so that whatever's on the spoon doesn't drip onto the stovetop. Am I crazy for thinking this? It's like
Simpler times.
Oh, man.
We just had to worry about getting our stovetops dirty,
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. Well, I think we could talk more about Isaac when we get to that moment. But for the most part of this episode, we are continuing the journey with Ellie and Dina in Seattle. The title of this day one, it is their first full day into the next morning that we see. And coming off of sort of the character development and like the Rada Kiss type conversations they were having going to Seattle, how do we think, or how did we enjoy watching that relationship dynamic unfold?
Well, starting off, we see them kind of exploring the streets of Seattle, and we see how the two of them still think that this trip is kind of like no big deal. They basically think the party that showed up in Jackson is all of the WLF, and that this is a piece of cake to enact their revenge and go home and live their lives. And that is made evident by how they approach exploring the streets of Seattle. We see Ellie climb on top of a tank and like throw caution to the wind as she lifts this heavy hatch door and makes this incredibly loud, conspicuous noise. Like if that specific area had been in any like moderate distance to the WLF or to the Seraphites or whoever else might be around, they would have been screwed. They just happen to be lucky in this instance, and so they're operating as if no big deal. We'll get there when we get there, and then we get to see the music shop scene. Which I mean, I don't know. When I played the game, I remember spending hours going around this opening area of Seattle.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely, 100%.
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we get the best part of that exploration, which is the scene in the music shop where they've decided to hole up until nightfall, where they can move undercover a little bit more inconspicuously. Dina is thankfully thinking a little bit more clearly in that regard.
A little bit more
And
tactically, yeah.
yeah, and Ellie finds a guitar that has been well preserved by desiccates and a guitar case, and she tunes it up, and we get a moment straight out of the game, which is completely lovely. I assume that's Bella singing, and I mean, Bella's got a great singing voice as she dives into "Take on Me" by Aha, the same version that we got in the game, and we get to see Dina like actively fall in love with Ellie in that moment, and at the same time, I think mourn Joel. The guitar and the skills that he's passed down to Ellie are just an extension of him, and so it's another way of saying goodbye, or celebrating who he was.
Agreed.
Yeah, and it's a callback to season one, and it's the same in the game, right? Where it's a callback to, the original story where Joel offers to teach Ellie guitar. So we learn at this point that he did it. It's just it all happened off screen.
Mm-hmm.
So again, like the only sort of Joel presence we get this episode is just a mention of him by name of a memory. We don't even get to see it.
I know.
It's hard. It hurts.
It's funny because, especially when you're walking around in the first game, every promise that Joel makes to Ellie in the game is totally kept. And totally kept into the second game. You see, so I'm going to teach you guitar sometime. He really does. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. All of that happens, we know. But the funny / sad, heartbreaking part of it is, it hasn't happened yet. And also, we don't know what will be included in the show. But I think quite a bit of it will. But it's sad because we're still without him.
Right. We did at least get that moment in the first episode of the season where he finds Ellie's guitar just kind of like thrown aside in her garage room. And it's like a nice guitar and clearly custom in some aspect. And there's the way he reacts to seeing it laying on the floor out of tune and just kind of like ignored. That reaction makes it really clear the connection he has with Ellie and that guitar together. To himself.
Definitely.
Yeah, agreed. And I gotta be honest, when I hear "Take on Me" by Aha on the radio and I'm jamming along with it, like perfectly great song, amazing music video, I don't know that I ever pay attention to lyrics because I can't hear them. They're too high. They break my brain. I don't know who can sing that high. Anyway, this really presented, this and the scene in the game really present an opportunity to appreciate the lyrics, which is actually, it's like a really nice love song. And when you slow it down, when you take all the synth out of it and make it acoustic, actually turns out, you know what? I'd fall in love with somebody playing me that song.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about Dina's character as well, because I've appreciated what they're doing with her.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, we do need to take a quick break. So we'll do that. And when we come back, we will chat about Dina. So, y'all, what I've really appreciated over these last couple of episodes is that they have really fleshed out Dina's character in a way that we don't get to see in the game. We really do get to learn more about her and her instincts and why she really is the brains to Ellie's brawn. I know that's something that gets called out earlier on in the season in one of the making of episodes. But I think they really found a way to elevate Dina's character and also give us more insight into the Dina and Ellie love story than we get in the game. I feel like in the game, so much of it is kind of implied. But in this, we actually get to see them have like a very cathartic, very physical love scene that we don't really get to see the same way in the game. I mean, they do have that, but I guess the moment's not as visceral because if I recall correctly, in the game they were in Eugene's weed shop,
Yeah.
right?
Maybe
Whereas
a little bit. I
here-
mean, that's pretty romantic too.
yeah,
but
they're actually in Seattle on the heels of Dina finding out that Ellie's immune.
well, and
So
it's
it's
and
a little
it's
different.
it's the we're both keeping a secret, and the curtain falls, and it's just we're
Yeah.
just both telling her once Dina knows, and not a second before, that she'll still have Ellie. Then it's like, okay, you should know this thing, because I knew as of this morning and just didn't tell you yet. And that's the other thing that I appreciated about sort of in the beginning of the episode. They're in the pharmacy. You see Dina kind of look off screen. And it's like, oh, okay. You don't know what she's doing. We knew what she was doing, but it's a little bit more fleshed out in the game, or in the show than in the game. And I think that the whole question about when Dina knew, like, lends itself to a little like strangeness around what her motives might have been in coming along with Ellie anyway. Because I think in the game she knows before they set off. I think.
Yeah, because there is actually, and it's subtle, but in the game, early in her pregnancy, before she's showing, there will be points where her character model, when she thinks nobody's paying attention to her, she'll start rubbing her belly and like holding it a little bit. And so it's like, yeah, that's like the hint. But in the show,
I just thought she wanted some honey. I mean, I'm like, here's my honey. She wants some honey. I gotta find some. I was looking around the quarantine zone. What's going on? Yeah.
Oh man. But yeah, I mean, in the show, I guess they had to find a different way to communicate that. I know we talked before about how the game has so many subtle ways of implying certain story arcs that maybe you're not aware of yet, that they've had to find new and creative ways to do in the show. And I think Dina like scrounging around for a pregnancy test is probably like one of the easier, like one of the lower hanging
Yeah.
options they had.
Yeah. Well, I love that even Ellie called out, like, they're probably pretty old, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, which, like, yeah, okay, I guess that is something that can expire, but we're covered. We're good. What I like also about the way that that was changed is I think that it was probably a natural choice, or a consequence after they had to wait 3 months to go after Joel, because Ellie had to recover, because in the show, these characters are human. They're not video game characters.
Right.
They can't just run off. So in that 3 months, I thought that I saw maybe this coming, or this being smoothed over, when they're in the tent in the Radakiss scene, and Dina's like, well, actually, I got back together with Jesse. It slipped in that she got back to Jesse with Jesse while Ellie was recovering in the hospital, which fixes the timeline. Otherwise, that would have happened by the time you get to month 3 of her pregnancy. If she were like pregnant when she is in the game, which is pretty much when the attack on Jackson is happening, or by that time, then by now it would be obvious. So I think it's important that they were peppering this in, and I especially like the way it's revealed to Ellie, and that they both kind of share their secrets, and then it's like we've dropped kind of the pretense. We're clearly good together. Even though Ellie's really got to think about her tactics when she's going off against infected. This is 2 for 2. She's like would have died. Yeah, so
Listen,
we can talk about that.
there's something else that needs to be called out, and I need to shout out Mark for this because he was the one who said it when we were watching the episode. But when Ellie and Dina were getting down to business, while Ellie still had an open wound
Yeah.
from an infected that bit her, and then she's like putting her hands places, I was like,
Oh,
this seems like a terrible idea, Ellie.
oh,
Yeah, maybe rebandage first at least.
Yeah, like,
because like we know Ellie's good, right? But like Dina,
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
think she is. And now she's pregnant. So, although maybe,
that's how
Maybe
Ellie
her-
was. Yeah,
right? Now maybe
we knew
Dina's
that's kind
child will
of
be
something to do
immune.
with. Uh-huh.
Yeah, maybe.
If her mother doesn't turn first, yeah, gotta wait till the very end. No, crazy. That's crazy. Thanks to Mark for that little PSA.
I do
Yeah,
like the
it's-
change of Dina not learning that she was pregnant until they get to Seattle, like not knowing for sure. I
Yeah.
think there's a little bit there's a little bit of irresponsibility is the word that comes to mind. I don't know if it's the best word. Like if you know you're pregnant and you're going off on this potential suicide mission, even if they think that it's pretty low stakes at this point, that says something about you as like a potential like mother, I guess. That's my mindset. Like
I think that's fair.
why would I put my baby, why would I put my body, my pregnancy, whatever, at risk on this revenge mission if I already knew I was pregnant? And so this takes a little bit of the weight off of her shoulders, or that blame, I guess you could put on her. She's on this trip, and at this point, she chooses to stay because she's choosing to do this with Ellie, who she says she sees a future with. And that gives her reason to stay, but it's harder to justify her coming in the first place if she knew that she was pregnant already.
It is.
So I like that change.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Chelsea, I remember talking to you when we were going through the game 5 years ago, and because of the kind of last minute way in which Dina finds out, or the premeditated way in which Dina knew, it leads to a really ugly moment with Ellie, shaming her almost for her decision making as a mother. She says something like, "And you ruined everything by getting pregnant," and it's really not a great sort of not very feminist, not very like, yeah, kind of we're feeling really good about these two friends together. That doesn't have to happen now. And I'm very, of all the lines to get cut or not make the TV show adaptation, I'm glad that line isn't in here. Do you remember what we were talking about, Laura?
Yeah, I have vague recollections of that, and I mean, it works for me how they're doing it in the show because they've really had to streamline the Ellie and Dina romance in a lot of ways they didn't in the game. In the game, again, I feel like a lot of it is heavily implied because we see these characters getting closer. We hear the types of conversations that they're having develop and morph over time. We see them living in various different circumstances as they develop as a couple. Whereas this, they really had to establish like these two are endgame, and I think they needed to do it pretty quickly because we're already halfway through the season.
Oh God.
And there's definitely some stuff to come that is very high stakes for Dina and Ellie, so they really needed to establish like their connection is important, and I think doing that by making Ellie well, making Dina and Ellie pretty quickly accept each other and their secrets, and making Ellie, very quickly without hesitancy say, "Wow, I'm gonna be a dad." Like
I love that.
Ellie's all in on raising a child with Dina. And we know she gets there eventually, but to your point, in the game she was not pleased about it at first.
Yeah.
Uh,
What?
yeah.
Yeah. One of the things in the show that I really like is when she says, like, "I'm gonna be a dad." She is very clearly. You get the sense that she does actually really want that. She wants the life with Dina.
Mhm.
She is the immature aspect of Ellie, though, is that she does not yet see how that is on a collision course with the current course of action. They're talking about this life together, this child they're gonna raise, as parents. Even Jesse's a parent. All of them are parents. They're gonna raise these kids. But then they go up on the roof and they're like, all right, we got to get over there. We're going to make them talk. We're going to torture this person. We're going to find out Nora knows where Abby is. We're going to get across town. It's literally like, guys, just turn around. Like, you can have one or the other. You cannot have both. Like, Ellie is so oblivious to the fact that this right here, like, the moment may already have passed, when if she really wants that white picket fence ending, she can't continue to do what she's doing, especially after, again, it's overlooked, life and death moment here. She was just bit again. Like, she's not immune to being torn apart, as they keep saying. And Dina especially is not immune to anything. And even just crossing town, there are areas of this town, sure, they're wide open. There are other areas where you can't even light a flare. Guys just having a smoke, and all of a sudden the tendrils come out and they feel the heat and they send a horde after them. My God. So it's not safe. They should just head back now. They should just turn around. They're not doing it.
No, they're not.
No.
There is an interesting point, and it's towards the end of the episode, actually, when, they're establishing that they need to head across town because they know where to go to find Nora, where Ellie is trying to get Dina to stay behind since she's pregnant. And I was like, in the game, didn't Dina stay at the theater because she was further along in her pregnancy? But I guess it sounds like in the show, since they have Dina being earlier in her pregnancy, she's like, "Nah, fuck that, I'm
Can
going."
still be active. Yeah.
Yeah.
She still consciously makes the same, or takes like the risk of risking herself and her child's life, which I don't think is super hot. But yeah, perhaps because it's earlier, she still feels like she can help out. And, if I'm being honest, Game Ellie versus Show Ellie needs the help, or could use the help slightly more because she's more human and therefore more flawed, slightly, than in the game. It makes sense that they would do this together. But yeah, I think that's all Ellie at the hospital where they're going.
We know at this point in Dina's pregnancy, we already see a couple of instances where kind of like the morning sickness or the nausea are overcoming her. So even though in the moment we saw in the episode, she was like, "I'm coming with you. We're going to do this together." She may not have a choice if she's too sick to be able to follow
That's
along.
true.
So that's still a possibility as well.
Yeah. Well, and there was obviously other excitement this episode too, with Ellie and Dina going into the abandoned transit tunnel.
Well, before we get there, let's talk about the TV station.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's so interesting because it feels like what you were saying, Laura, about Pam's perspective too, and like not knowing what's happening next. I couldn't help but feel like a lot of this episode, anything that wasn't the new stuff, like with Isaac, was the tentpole set pieces from that whole section of the game, which, as Chelsea said, like you spend an hour in the beginning of Seattle, probably 5 or 6 hours into Seattle before you get to the TV station. And watching them go from like the TV station to the tunnel to the theater, that's this long drawn out gameplay with tons of like, interactions and scary, terrifying stuff. Kind of is the word I'm looking for is not like overwhelming, but it was summary. It was like it's a smaller town. It feels like a smaller town, I think, in a way, to me.
Yeah. I felt similarly where when we got to the theater, I was like, oh, we're already at the theater?
Yeah,
was
you
like,
just come out of the
granted.
tunnel and it's right across the. Although it's
Yeah.
like that in the game too. But yeah,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. And I mean, I will say Seattle's not a huge city. So I can get it, but like, yeah, you definitely just you get a lot more exploration time. So watching like the show interpretation of it where you're covering like 8 hours of gameplay in the span of 1 hour of television feels a little like, whoo, like we got through all of that in
Hmm.
such a short period of time. But I think they did a really good job with it, including I would say that the change they made to how Dina finds out that Ellie is immune, right? Because in the game, it's not the same circumstance. It's that Ellie's mask breaks, right? And she's exposed to
oh,
spores,
spores.
which we don't have yet in this
Not
show,
yet.
but seems like it's coming.
That's
So,
gonna be an interesting, like, to look at what the decision
yeah.
was, like why the decision is made to do what they didn't do in season 1, but to do it in season 2, but not right away, but next episode,
Well,
based
as
on the
they've
next week's
said,
on
everything's in this season is about escalation. And so
escalation.
we've already
True.
seen the infected themselves have evolved. And so it would make sense that the dispersal or the methods by which you can become infected would evolve as well. And so I actually really like that as a change rather than just accepting that these are all the things that exist at this point. And then we get to an eventual game, a second game, and it's like, oh, but also this happened. I like that they're setting it up as kind of like progression that
I
is still
agree.
happening. They're
Yeah.
still evolving.
I mean, I'm not quite a mycologist, but here's one thing I'll say about that, which is that spores are pretty fundamental to mushrooms and fungus. Like you wouldn't get spores after you already have the mycelial network and clickers and was it the heavy the big guys. You know what I'm saying? Like
Spores.
Yeah, big
spore
boy.
spores with big boy. Spores would pretty much be there from the but you know, what if there's actually, this is what I say to myself. I'm like, can't sleep at night. I'm like, what if there's actually a really cool explanation for why there's spores now and wasn't yet? And I'm like very excited. So that wasn't a
Yeah.
criticism, but
Mhm.
anyway.
No, it'll be interesting to see that because it seems like, and I know we're getting a little bit ahead here,
Yeah.
but it does seem like from the preview we're getting that, but also the Rat King next week.
It sure friggin' looks like it.
So that's another level of escalation.
And I don't know who it is looking
Goodness.
at him or exploring that area, but that's not something Ellie does in the game.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
No. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how the perspective shifts are represented
Hmm.
in these scenes, in these episodes, because it really seems like we're heavily focused on Ellie's perspective.
Right.
And I mean, based on the fact that this episode, they definitely dropped the Seattle Day 1 card, it was like, okay, so is that the rest of the season? Like, we only got 3 episodes left after this, so we get day 2, day 3, and then
All the flashbacks with Joel in an episode.
or like there's a confrontation.
Hmm.
There's a
To
Mason and
come.
Druckmann title where they open up and they're like, "Thanks for watching 6 episodes of The Last of Us season 2. Now here's all the flashbacks with Pedro Pascal that we didn't include in the previous seasons. Thanks everybody. Goodbye." Kind of be a thing. Yeah, it's gonna be wild because it definitely look. There's so much to, even with the fact that we said like 8 hours, 6 to 8 hours of gameplay in Seattle has probably already happened. The game itself, again, is like 4 times longer than the first game. It's like a 40-hour kind of story to the game, I want to say. So we're still not. I'd say we're maybe 30% through the overall story of The Last of Us 2. Would you guys say that's about right, given everything that has yet to
Yeah,
happen?
I think that's about
So,
right.
but we're 50% through the season, and we know that The Last of Us Part 2 is not being fully adapted into this season. So,
Right.
it's kind of very interesting.
Going back
Yeah.
to the TV station, I wanted to highlight that this is the first moment where Dina and Ellie have somewhat of an understanding of what they might actually be up against, or they at least have the honesty to, in that moment, acknowledge that they have no idea what they're up against. Because they walk into that room, and here are these people hanging with their entrails spilling out, and like, did anybody see that coming? I mean, aside from us having played the game, but like from their perspective, how could they have predicted something like that? And then in the behind the scenes, I love the tidbit that they actually hung real live stunt people up, which just adds a whole extra level of creep factor and ick factor into what's happening in that scene. And I think it's Dina who asks, "What the F is wrong with the people in Seattle?" And clearly, everybody's monsters. We see that scene with Isaac interrogating the Seraphite, and it's absolute cruelty. We saw the previous episode where the Seraphites, including the children, were slaughtered by presumably the wolves. And so, like, everybody's at each other's neck. Everybody's killing everybody. We don't know who started it. They can't get to the bottom of that. And at this point, it doesn't matter. The intense violence between these factions is so high that Dina and Ellie have stepped into the middle of it, and they finally understand, oh crap, we might be screwed. But again, their hatred for Abby and what she did to Joel is so intense that they are declining to take this opportunity to get out of Dodge and go live their lives with their kid.
That's a really great point. And I think it's intended to serve as a reminder. I don't know that Ellie and Dina have picked up on this yet, clearly, to what you're saying, Chelsea, but it's a reminder that, Ellie and Dina, y'all aren't the only ones out here with an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
You're not the only ones out here with an axe to grind, and there are people who are way more dangerous and way more deadly than both of you. So here's your warning.
Like,
But
like,
again,
hey,
don't take it.
you guys have a walled settlement somewhere? Cool. We have entire armies that are fighting and like killing one another, and you guys, what, have Christmas carols? Nice, clever. Okay. It's the making of had two lines that I think were really good, and I wrote down, which is that the first one is that in terms of escalation, the wolves, Washington Liberation Front versus Seraphite conflict has escalated to the point where they're already dehumanizing the other. And so this is why you see the much more intense violence, Isaac straight up torturing somebody, and the wolves hung up or strung up by, in the TV station, is that this conflict is now that we're new to is an old conflict. And so all of the justifications that it takes time to like really build up, to build people who are ideologically prepared to do this without question, that's all done. So this is like an old conflict. And I think the show is probably very careful to show us like the whole wolf thing is at least a decade old. So, it kind of gives the show this lived in feel, but it also represents something that's altogether more evolved than anything anybody in Jackson seems to have. And the second thing that was said in the making of that I want to get back to about the violence between them. You know what? I'm forgetting it. Darn. I'll have to come back to it.
Well, on
Hey,
that subject
you know
of
what?
violence, something that you and I talked about, Eric, when we talked about season 1, especially the last episode, the way that they filmed that final scene in the hospital where Joel's mowing down all of the fireflies, they focused on like they super focused on all these people's deaths. Like they didn't, like, it wasn't just like a video game character where you toss aside, move on to the next one. There was
Come get
lingering, there was
some.
like slow camera. Let's look at the people who are dying. And this episode, I mean, we already have had violence in this season so far, obviously, but this episode marks the first like really intense violence at the hands of Ellie and the consequences that are going to start following Abby and her friends because of their actions in Jackson, and the high levels of violence on all counts. There were a couple moments in this episode where I got a little bit emotional. I mean, obviously, towards the end with Dina and Ellie having that catharsis in the theater is a great emotional release moment, and like Ellie singing "Take on Me" earlier is. But the maybe abstract one is when Ellie killed the Fedra soldier as they were escaping the TV station. Like that is her first kill in Seattle, and we know, and it's not even just because we're game players, it's because like we can see the trajectory of what's coming next. There is a lot of death and violence to follow, and it's heartbreaking, right? Like every human life lost is a terrible thing when humanity is on the verge of extinction. And here are these humans who continue to find conflict with each other and continue to kill each other. And that is a huge central theme of The Last of Us as a whole, but particularly part 2. And that breaks my heart. It breaks my heart.
That leads into the other quote I was going to mention, which is that I think it's Mason that says that the us versus them is the real infection, is the real virus. That is what took over the world.
Right, and it's not us humans versus them infected. It's us humans versus those humans.
It's humans versus each other, and I love that. That elevates this material to a commentary on our times. I think ultimately, and I love what you said, Chelsea, about every life Ellie takes is sacred and is a shame, and it's true, and a lot of these people would be alive and in a much different place if Joel hadn't done what he did. And
right.
I feel like the show could be going harder on look at what Joel did, but maybe now it's not the time.
It might get there. And we can come back and talk about, wrap up our thoughts on this episode and maybe talk a little bit more about what we think is to come in the weeks ahead. But first, we do need to take one more quick break, and we'll be right back.
Thanks for keeping us honest, Laura.
I'm on it. I'm the one who has the timer, so
I
get to cheat a little bit.
So, Laura, you wanted to talk about after the TV station.
Yes, the rail station. So this is when Ellie and Dina are fleeing the wolves who come in and find the grotesque scene of their comrades hanging with their entrails spilled out in front of them. And they chase Ellie and Dina down. Ellie and Dina make their way into this cramped, rocky little tunnel that leads them into this abandoned transit station that has old abandoned train cars skewed about it and skeletons and other remains inside of them. It's all very, very gross. And of course, the wolves know exactly where Ellie and Dina are going, so it's not long before the wolves also have their patrol in the transit station trying to find Ellie and Dina. Unfortunately for them, they light too many flares and end up attracting the attention of the mycelial network. And before we know it, a horde of infected is in the station, which gives Ellie and Dina like a half-second head start, but they're not really all that far ahead.
No.
Yeah.
I love the imagery of this. I think the red flares in the tunnel is maybe the most iconic shot of any of The Last of Us 2 that stands out in my mind, at least. When I think back to the game, that's the shot I think of, is the red flares and the dark tunnel and the infected all around. It's just such a cool visual, and so I'm glad that they adapted that so well, which, I mean, we had no reason to believe they wouldn't, but...
Right. Well, there's
great.
2 in this episode, because the guitar shop is the other one. I think it's the loading screen.
Absolutely.
And it's the exact shade of green. It's the lush greenery in the game, and I'm like, they did great with that. So it's the exact shade of red of the flare and the exact shade of green in the guitar. I think they're both in this episode. Yeah. The 2 things that they nailed.
Yeah, but what an intense sequence.
It's wild, and it's great. The most terrifying... There's a lot of terrifying things. Maybe we shouldn't make superlative declarations, but they keep getting fresh bodies. Like, there are so many runners, which are like the most recent stage of infected, and so there's so many people that, are still dying and still getting, infected and converting and now coming after you. And that's very terrifying. Like at this point, there would be so much fewer people, or like, but they'd all be clickers. So like, I don't know that that's better. Anyway, it was a really satisfying sequence of running that mirrors quite perfectly in the game. And I think it's another situation where I'm glad they didn't repeat themselves, but you can throw a bottle to get the infected to notice the
Mhm.
guys coming in the tunnel, the wolves coming in the tunnel. But that would have been too repetitive because they just looked at the bottle the other episode, Dina and Ellie. So, you know.
Yeah. You do still get, I think, plenty of that, like wink and a nod to game players in this episode. Just thinking about Ellie and Dina navigating the radio station to get out when the wolves reach the station and discover what's happened, and how Ellie and Dina have to like crouch and navigate the
That's
furniture and all those boxes they're in front of.
yeah.
Like, that is straight out of the game.
Mhm.
Yep.
So,
And I was like,
I
she's going up the stairs. I hope that guy doesn't look. And then he looks. I'm like, oh
Yep.
God, what are you gonna do?
Right. And then I
Yeah.
think Mark mentioned when he was on with us a few episodes ago, the listen mode that Dina kind of
Dina's
uses. Like she closes
Yeah.
her eyes, let's count all the infected. That's such a great adaptation of the
so-
game mechanic too. Like it works.
yeah.
Definitely. And like we've seen them do before, where they'll crouch, and again, like when she's doing the listening, like it kind of reminds me of like, and maybe this is what you're saying too, so if I'm repeating we can just keep moving, but like when you hold down, what is it, R2?
L1 or
L1,
R1.
it's
Mhm.
it's one of the additional triggers, yeah, and then you get to actually visualize
Yeah.
anything that's around you.
So satisfying.
Yeah.
But as Ellie and Dina go, and of course the biting happens. And again, what is it with Ellie's? I'm glad she took down the guy at the TV station. Obviously, it shows that she's healed from her injury, and her broken rib, because she's able to overpower and kind of even try and like throw down, like use her weight to topple a grown man in armor. So that speaks to her, I don't know, formidability. But her getting bit, with the infected also speaks to her like complete lack of planning, or the fact that they got in this situation at all means they didn't take proper enough care. So I don't know. It's kind of both are true. Ellie is prepared enough or good enough to fight in this kind of war, but then also like not prepared enough.
Isn't that headlock that she has the Fedra soldier in like exactly the scenario she was practicing in episode 1?
Yeah.
Yeah. So she has progressed despite her injury when she was kicked. So I like seeing that. And, she didn't plan. They weren't prepared. We've made that clear. I think they're going to be maybe a little bit more careful, especially Ellie, a little bit more careful going forward out of necessity now that they know that this whole Seattle situation is a lot more intense than they expected. But that moment where she makes the sacrifice play and puts her arm up to protect Dina from getting bit, I obviously we know and she knows that it's not like a suicidal sacrifice play, but she is still getting bit by an active infected, and I like her instincts in that moment to protect Dina at all costs, and
Yeah.
it was just a really great moment.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, honestly, I'm not sure what else Ellie could have done in the moment. I think she did the best thing she could have done based on the circumstances.
Mhm.
Since, they were kind of chased into, that whole scenario with the infected in the transit station anyhow. But yeah, I mean, it does also speak to how impulsive she is. I guess it's just in this particular circumstance, her impulsivity worked out for them. It doesn't always.
Yeah, and I did appreciate watching Dina like almost like pre-mourn Ellie, because as soon as she's bit, she knows she's gonna have to shoot her and put her down, and like that's not something that she's would have wanted to do.
I wonder
know.
why.
Yeah, I think they might like each other. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe just a little bit.
Yeah. And speaking of that, I want to spend just a moment talking about Dina's speech about coming to terms with her bisexuality and it like being suppressed by
Yeah.
her mother, because as a queer and trans person, like I totally understand that instinct that is taught. It's not like a natural instinct. It's taught to you to hide your true self and to try and make the false self work. And there just comes a point where it doesn't. And when you shame queer identities, it makes queer people feel ashamed. Like, imagine that. And so I love seeing Dina sort of coming to grips with her bisexuality and like finally making the play like, okay, I can't imagine myself with Jesse. He's not, quote, the one, but I do imagine a future with Ellie. And now that I've almost lost her, I have to like dive in now or I might potentially never get the chance.
Yeah.
And so I loved seeing Dina
Yeah.
explain her history and explain like she knew Ellie's feelings for her. She said it was pretty obvious. You weren't doing a good job of hiding it. But she apologizes and says, it just took me some time and I'm glad that she's there and is accepting herself just as much as she's accepting Dina because that's just as if not more important.
Totally.
I really like that, and it is what Dina describes is going through the motions, and for who she said even after my mom died, she's still trying to like please her and do what she would have wanted when what she wanted was to for Dina to hide who she is, and but that's so true to life. That is what we do, especially given certain parental relations. We will do that. We want to please those who care for us or anything like that. So it speaks to true life for sure.
And I think there's like another commentary here in that when Ellie and Dina first are arriving in Seattle in this episode, they're seeing pride murals in the city around them and they don't know what they are. And it's because again in the show the world ended in 2003. So yes, the concept of pride existed then, but kids who grew up in this post-apocalyptic hellscape would probably have little to no frame of reference for the fact that at one time there was actually a community for people like them, right?
And gay marriage legalized.
Right.
Which-
That was
Yeah.
something that Craig Mazin
Well,
said, I think, in the
yeah.
first episode of this season's official Last of Us podcast, was that the apocalypse happened in 2003. That's 12 years before marriage equality happened in the United States. And so, like, it would be almost irresponsible to ignore what freezing time in 2003 would mean to the queer community.
Yeah.
When you have as your main character this queer character. And so I love that they're not only just letting Ellie be herself in however she wants to see herself and to allow her to pursue this relationship with Dina, but then also allowing Dina to explain what it felt like to have to hide part of herself. And that's just because like her mother may have done it because she had her own bias. Her mother may have done it because she knew what the world was like and wanted to protect her. When it's already so difficult to be a person living in the post-apocalypse.
Definitely.
Yep. I texted you guys while the episode was happening, but I was like, I think that's my favorite line of this episode. What's with all the rainbows? Maybe they were all optimists. I love that that Dina and Ellie have rode on horseback on Shimmer, which is a very pretty name for a pretty pony. Into the city of optimists, Seattle. Although also home to Nirvana and a lot of cool bands. But yeah, it's a treat. Watching the show is a treat, and I like how on edge or not complacent we can get in thinking that we know how things are going to go, because I don't really have any clue how things are going to go down the next 3
No.
episodes remaining to us in this season.
I know. Like, I'm sitting here going, are we going to see Abby again? this season. Are we not seeing her again till next season? I really don't know how they're gonna play this.
We would think that we'd see her at some point, just depending on how they're continuing to outline. Like we got the title card at the beginning of the episode, Seattle Day One, and the episode is titled Day One. And so what I'm curious about is next episode titled Day Two, or are they going to break from that episode naming mechanism and still give us the title card, Seattle Day Two, or is it just going to be Day One, Day Two, Day Three? Because I don't know. I'm just curious. Who knows?
Same. And I'm just thinking about sort of how the Seraphite story is going to unfold. Of course, we know a lot of that involves Abby. So again, we're still seeing that story develop through Ellie's
I'm really
perspective.
eager to
So,
see more of the
yeah,
WLF and Seraphite stuff.
Same.
You know what? There's an interaction we didn't necessarily focus on that I do want to bring up before we wrap, which is what do we think of the young man's sort of gotcha moment with Isaac, where he said, the reason I know we're going to win is because every day a wolf joins the Seraphites, but nobody ever goes to join the wolves. I really quite liked, that any time there's a character in at a disadvantaged position who kind of retains like the moral high ground, or has like a gotcha moment, it's all obviously very satisfying. As sad as it was what's happening to him, I think that there is a case to be made for, I'm going to say pacifism, because that's not what the Seraphites are about, but this more self-proclaimed like enlightened kind of way of thinking versus Isaac's very clear brute force kind of just dehumanization tactics. What do you think is going on there?
Yeah. I tend to think that it's probably like a more macro or like cosmic sense of looking at the world and like our roles in it. So I have to imagine that the Seraphites are maybe, if we're going to make like a Harry Potter comparison, like compare them to the centaurs in Harry Potter, who are like, yeah, I mean, this kid's going to die, but the story's way bigger than one kid, and that was kind of the impression that I got from the character that Isaac was torturing, that he was sort of like, this is bigger than you and me, and at the end of the day you're gonna lose because you don't realize that.
And he's kind of calling out Isaac's hypocrisy, though he doesn't know that he's calling out Isaac's hypocrisy. That line, I mean, Isaac left Fedra, betrayed Fedra, because he thought that Fedra had corrupted the ideals of humanity and like giving the voice to the people and allowing them to participate in life and government and whatever else. They'd taken those rights away. And so betraying Fedra was his way of establishing a new order that presumably would give people those rights back. And here he is, 10 years later, torturing another fellow human, yes, with a very different belief system, a very different lifestyle, but still a fellow human, a fellow resident of Seattle. And so like, again, I said this earlier, the oppressed have become the oppressor. And it's just pointing out that hypocrisy in Isaac.
Well, because how do you square this with the line that was added to the show? It's not in the game. It was added to the show that Abby tells Joel, hey, Isaac has this rule where we don't hurt somebody that can't defend themselves, and I'm going to break it so I can hurt you. Isaac is totally hurting a guy that can't defend himself. He shoots him dead after torturing him. So was Abby lying? Is she full of you-know-what? Or is Isaac breaking his own rule here? Like, what are we supposed to, like, if again, taking it back to Abby, hopefully the show comes around to her eventually again. What does it mean to see Isaac in this, brutal role when apparently he's principled or has some kind of rule?
I think it's just pointing out that leaders do things behind closed doors that they don't want their followers to see.
100%. And I think also it's continuing to hammer home the significance of multiple characters in this story thinking that they have the moral high ground and they are in the right. And because they think they're right, they think they're justified.
Well, and they call the Seraphites animals. And so the
Yeah.
question is like, are they animals because of their violence, or are they animals because they have a different lifestyle? And either way, does it justify dehumanizing them to such an extent?
Yeah.
Here's one last thought I had because I watch I think it's Screen Crush or Screen Rant. I'll look it up on YouTube. Every week I watch some of the like Easter eggs that you missed, et cetera, et cetera. I was shown after the last week's episode in an intro to the Seraphites that in the game they absolutely disembowel people. I did not remember this, and I was wondering if this is because I played the game on light mode. Chelsea, do you remember, as a grounded survivor, do you remember the Seraphites disemboweling? Because the scene I saw in the game was in the rain somewhere outdoors, and you're watching other people be killed by Seraphites, and they literally go and disembowel the guy. You hear the scream, and then all of them iterate like, and now he is free. Like now he's like, the disemboweling is a religious act to free them up to the prophet. I don't remember any of this, but it's in the game and now it's in the show.
It's been a long time since I've played, but that
Okay.
does sound really familiar.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
and
I
Laura,
think-
yeah.
I remember this as well. The Seraphites, I think initially, maybe it's kind of been accelerated in the show.
I think
How
maybe.
they've done some other things, but I think in the game at first you're kind of intended to think that this is a pacifist culture that are being victimized, and it's like no, like the Seraphites and the WLF, like they're kind of two sides of the same coin.
Mm-hmm.
It was Screen Crush.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like what we're seeing, and I am wondering if we have any other thoughts of this episode.
I think that we've about covered it for now, but I know that next week is going to be crazy. It seems like next week some shit is going to pop off. Unless the previews we're seeing don't cover stuff for next week. I know sometimes with the previews we've gotten, they've kind of faked us out and like given us stuff from episodes in the future. But I think timeline wise and based on the amount of episodes that we have left, I think it makes sense for the Rat King to be the main event next week. So I can't wait for that.
Man, once you show that though, where do you go? There's nowhere to go after you show that thing.
Well, maybe with the infected, but obviously the show's not exactly about the infected. So
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't even know. I don't know.
yeah.
I don't know. One thing I want to ask you guys, and we can, end the episode, but I'm wondering if there's any room somewhere, maybe even as a separate video, to talk about two distinct paths from the game. Tommy goes ahead. Tommy goes ahead of them in the game. How will that storyline intersect? Because and Ellie and Dina find the two men that were tortured at the same time, both showing the same location. They're literally following Tommy here. Given that Tommy has a very good reason to not be here in the show yet, will he be here in the show, do we think? And what about Jesse?
So I don't want to get into spoiler territory.
That's
but
why I'm suggesting we can end the episode, but is there
I'm
something, because you're worried that they want will they not adapt it, do you think?
No. I'm worried because this show, I think they have shown that they're not afraid to deviate from the source material, and there are things that happen with both of those characters that I could see the show maybe changing up
Mhm.
Again, like a little bit of a wink to people who played the game, but I don't want to give any spoilers for people who didn't potentially, you know.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that we leave any of that last 2 minutes in, but wanted to communicate with
No,
you
we
guys
can't.
about whether there's any. Because I don't want to spoil that Tommy is anywhere in the picture, honestly. Because it'll be very exciting when someone's
he
head
might
starts
not be.
popping off from a great distance. Yeah. Um, but yeah, let's say we end things there and look brightly forward to season 2, episode 5 of The Last of Us, possibly titled Day 2. You heard it here first. And we want to thank our co-hosts. Thank you, Chelsea, and thank you, Laura.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you. It's been
And thanks
fun.
to all of our listeners listening live, whether that's on Twitch or on our YouTube. We do also want to call out what our channels are to make sure that you are following, liked, and subscribed to us. Of course, I don't have those links ready.
Oh, that's okay. We are What the Hype podcast on Twitch, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and we are What the Hype Show over on X, formerly Twitter, if you still use that. I don't.
I still visit the Sears Tower in Chicago, so yeah, I still use Twitter. But oh yes, and our website is whatthehypepodcast.com. Also, we're waiting for more spoiler-free emails to let us know what you're thinking of the show so far. Whatthehypepodcast@gmail.com. You can tell us what you're thinking of the show so far, but just don't put it in the subject line because Pam sees that inbox too, and we must hashtag protect Pam.
Just in case. And yeah, we are covering a lot of other stuff over on What the Hype. So myself, Pam, and Micah actually just did an episode recapping season 5 of Netflix's You, which was a really, really fun season. We had a great recap episode of that. So if you're a fan of Netflix's You, definitely recommend you check that out. And also coming up this week, myself, Eric, and Pam will be celebrating the Gilmore Girls 25th anniversary. Believe it or not, it's been 25 years. I feel old. But yeah, definitely you can check that out either here on YouTube or by checking out our podcast, What the Hype Podcast, anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Awesome. Well, that's the hype on episode 4 of The Last of Us. 3 episodes remain this season. Feels so short when I say it, but you know,
Anything could happen.
anything can happen. We'll continue being surprised pleasantly by all the choices. So tune in next week, Sunday night. We'll see you. Thank you so much.
See you then.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much, y'all. Bye.